The American President Donald Trump just announced that the second phase of the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip will be announced before Christmas. He said that before the holiday periods, it's very likely that the announcement on the entry will be announced. What does that mean? And will the war completely end at that time? Well, in regards to the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, Trump already announced that there's a peace deal in Gaza. This ceasefire has been breached over 400 times by Israel. Almost 400 Palestinians were martyred during Israeli breaches. There were minimal responses from the Palestinian resistance where necessary, but Israel constantly has these breaches in terms of direct attacks against the civilians, and also breaches to do with the entry of goods and medical equipment, and also houses and tents, temporary housing and tents going inside of the Gaza Strip. But Axios had this report that Trump is planning to announce Gaza Government Board of Peace by Christmas, according to several officials. This Board of Peace, or what is called as the Board of Peace, was something that was mentioned by Donald Trump multiple times, and there were certain names like Tony Blair that were nominated to be part of this Board of Peace. Now, in relation to the people who will be governing Gaza, an independent government, the likelihood of Donald Trump announcing it is pretty much there, because Donald Trump is directly involved at the end of the day of the ceasefire. He orchestrated it alongside, of course, multiple mediators. But the Palestinian side said that this board, or the government in Gaza, this transitional government that is supposed to be formed of individuals who have no connection with Hamas or the Palestinian Authority, by the way, has to be agreed by them. And they indeed submitted multiple names that were most likely known not only to the United States, but to Israel as well. Now, in relation to the Board of Peace, Donald Trump is trying to portray this Board of Peace as the ultimate side responsible for what's going to happen inside of the Gaza Strip, when really and truly it's a bit more complicated than that, because the Palestinian resistance is still present in Gaza, and although Hamas will not directly be governing Gaza, they will still be having the influence and power on the ground. One of the biggest things that's going to happen in phase 2, or is supposed to happen, according to the 20-point report or agreement that Donald Trump published before, is that Israel is supposed to withdraw from all of the parts of Gaza with the entry of what is called as the International Stabilization Force, a force that Israel wanted to be as an extension of the Israeli terror forces. They wanted its mission to be primarily to disarm the Palestinian resistance, whereas from a Palestinian perspective, that wasn't the case. This led to multiple countries reviewing, assessing their participation. Many countries also withdrew. But now we're hearing the same names of countries potentially participating in this force as they were in the beginning. And we're talking about Egypt, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Indonesia, primarily. Israel had a veto primarily on Turkish forces. They didn't want them to enter Gaza. But the talks in the background are much more than what is being published. And from an Israeli perspective, they had certain vetoes before and certain red lines, or what they called as red lines, that they later on completely took off the table. They became normal and things went ahead as normal and as planned. What is this supposed to look like for the people of Gaza? Is it going to really end the genocide and the Israeli barbarism in Gaza? Well, we have evidence in front of us. Now, Donald Trump said that this is going to be a peace deal in Gaza, And there's nothing that resembles peace for the average Palestinian person. What we have seen indeed is a significant reduction in the ongoing bombardment and genocidal acts of Israel. And despite that, there was a continuation of the slow-mo genocide of Israel, not only by breaches and direct killings of innocent civilians, including children, during this so-called ceasefire, but also through a very carefully orchestrated and engineered starvation campaign and making life conditions impossible for the population inside of the Gaza Strip. The entry of phase 2, if Trump does announce it and if it does actually go ahead, will be coinciding with the timing that we heard of approximately 2 months that would end the initial phase. There were initially talks about the first phase being 53 days. On the 10th of December, it's going to be exactly 2 months. And if Donald Trump will be announcing anything of the sort, it will be very close to that. However, with the certain complications in relation to Israel and its demands and its constant withdrawal from certain agreements and breaches of certain agreements, that might be slightly extended or amended. And the example that we've seen so far of this ceasefire having so many breaches should give us an example of how the second phase would look like. Israel would still most likely have an agreement with the United States to carry out strikes in Gaza in what both parties would deem as reasonable to attack, whether it's Palestinian resistance or people, because the majority of the people who were killed, if not all of them, during the ceasefire, now the first phase of it, were innocent civilians. What would complicate things further, however, is the presence of the International Stabilization Force. The fact that there will be an International Stabilization Force consisting of several countries, and if we just take, for an example, Turkey and Egypt, we're talking about two countries with very strong and advanced armies who, although they didn't cut completely their relationship with Israel, they have a complicated relationship with Israel, to say the least, if we don't want to say that their relationship with Israel is very bad. They didn't cut all of the communication lines with Israel, but the tensions rose to unprecedented levels ever since the Gaza genocide began. If Israel would attack and if Israel would accidentally, for example, carry out a strike on one of these forces, they could potentially take it as an aggression against their countries. There would be certain mechanisms to try and prevent any altercations between the Israeli terror forces and the International Stabilization Force. However, there is no guarantee that that would not happen whatsoever should we enter phase 2. Now, from the legal perspective, Benjamin Netanyahu is still a war criminal. Benjamin Netanyahu is a wanted war criminal. The ICC had an arrest warrant, and it still has an arrest warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu. And people are wondering what is happening with this arrest warrant and why is Benjamin Netanyahu not being arrested. There's an interesting development where the prosecutor, or the deputy of the IC chief prosecutor, is asking now to discuss charges against Netanyahu in his absence. And he is saying that there were previous examples where they don't have to be present, and we need to continue, and we need to take more action. All of the moves coming by the ICC and the ICJ are being sabotaged by the United States of America. And that is one of the biggest problems. The United States is arguing that if a country doesn't recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ, then they shouldn't be allowed to operate. However, we know very well that all of this is politically motivated because of the traditional American protection of Israel, with unprecedented numbers of vetoes in the United Nations Security Council, constant diplomatic backing, and constant army, military, and financial backing of the state of Israel, and the demonization and labeling of anything or anyone who criticizes Israel and supports the Palestinian cause. And the United States, what they've done in the past couple of years, shows exactly how the United States views international law. They are constantly applying pressure on the ICC. ICC personnel, the chief prosecutor was threatened officially with a letter signed by congressmen from the United States. Of course, we're not surprised. All of them are aligned with AIPAC and very strong advocates for Israel. But the fact that they are having sanctions against these people shows the approach, the real approach of the United States and its disregard of anything to do with international law, when that international law goes against anyone who is allied with the United States of America. And there are a few things that are important to note in relation to sanctions. Average people, they will not really feel what sanctions look like. But the other day, there was an example with Francesca Albanese, who spoke about the sanctions. Imagine a person who advocates for human rights is being sanctioned. You stop having the ability to have normal transactions. Some people start having problems in day-to-day tasks, such as driving or communicating with people. They apply so much pressure on them individually, and it affects their family life, it affects their day-to-day life, only because they are trying to implement international law. We haven't spoken about politically motivated people or ideologically motivated people. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, so long as it's in line with international law. But we're primarily talking about people who are asking for the implementation of international law. Isn't international law something that is supposed to be welcomed and is necessary for a global security, for the protection of human rights and people, regardless of their race or religion or background? Yet the United States has sanctions and applies so much pressure against these people and against these institutions simply for asking to implement international law. But that goes back to the pressure and strength of the Zionist lobby and how complicit Western establishments are with Zionism and with Israel. A prime example of this is the fact that these people are still able to go to the Eurovision. Although countries like Ireland, Spain, the Netherlands, Slovenia refuse to participate in the Eurovision because of Israel's participation now and have boycotted it, it's still going ahead. When Russia started the attack on Ukraine, within a month, the world countries, Western countries primarily, met, immediate sanctions, called for the ICC, ICJ, Putin's a war criminal, sanctions against Russia. They lifted hate speech in Facebook of Russian people. Russian people started to feel demonized all across the world, excluded, being attacked for the fact that they're coming from Russia. Russian businessmen were targeted directly because the United States and its allies started to link them somehow to the Russian establishment, although in many cases they couldn't prove anything. Yet a country that is proven to be conducting a genocide by the international courts and with a prime minister who is wanted for war crimes by the ICC is still being enabled and continuing to have this participation in the Eurovision. And the funny thing is, well, I'm not sure if it's very funny or if it's like normal, but we have organizations like the BBC backing the decision to let Israel join the Eurovision, as several countries boycotted Israel or boycotted the event directly. The level of influence of the Zionist lobby in these countries and in mainstream media outlets, and primarily with the United States establishment, is beyond what people imagine and think. These people get away with these murders, with these crimes, and they have the audacity to also challenge these countries whenever they try and take any action against them. It shows you the level of influence and the level of blackmail that they have against all of these countries. I mean, having the Eurovision being backed by an organization like the BBC, for example, and several countries like the United States and others not having a problem with Israel participating. How can you explain that apart from direct complicity with these crimes? They are directly complicit in what Israel is doing inside of the Gaza Strip. Now, yesterday, I spoke about the assassination of the head of Abu Shabab militia, Yasser Abu Shabab, by the Palestinian resistance. Today, we're having more information and more revelation about how that assassination happened. And several sources said that this assassination happened through an infiltration by the Palestinian resistance into this organization that led to the assassination of Yasser Abu Shabab and one of his deputies called Dheini. Again, this operation signals the capability of the Palestinian resistance, despite the fact that this is an area technically under Israeli control, or what is assumed to be Israeli control. They managed to carry out that operation, and Israel is now saying this is a huge hit for Israel. There was a lot of criticism and a lot of comments being made in Israel by Israeli politicians and by the Israeli media of how this was a huge blow for the Israeli army in Gaza, because this was the main man of the Israeli army. And if he was assassinated in such a way, they have no hope of an alternative. People were talking in Israel about the need to come up with a new figure now to replace him. But then again, they have no other option now with the assassination of this figure that Israel was portraying as a strong figure and preparing him to have some sort of security control, because he also had connection with the United States command inside of Israel, preparing him for the following phases inside of the Gaza Strip. The final thing that I wanted to talk to you about, Israel has always been talking about the October 7th attacks and the fact that Hamas and the resistance, they kidnapped people and trying to play the victim card as usual. Yet they reveal themselves time after time. This time was by a major general who was resigned from the Israeli army, Nitzan Alon. Nitzan Alon said that we told Hamas who kidnapped the Bibas family so that they can locate them. Why is this important? Why is this relevant? The Bibas family was a family that Israel constantly portrayed in the media as a sign of the criminality of the Palestinian resistance and how they kidnap innocent people and kidnap innocent children. This directly confirms, straight from the mouth of the IDF, that it wasn't Hamas who kidnapped them. It was another movement in Gaza who used the vacuum that happened due to the incompetence or deliberate incompetence of Israel on the 7th of October. With an example, I mean, we have an example now. We see the militias that are operating under the Israeli support. Some of these militias or similar or other armed groups used what happened on the 7th of October to kidnap Israelis, either with underage, under 18-year-olds or people who were elderly, for example, for their own reasons. Either they wanted bribery or whatever. Israel confirmed that Yasser Abu Shabab, who was their main ally, was a drug addict and a drug dealer and a criminal who was linked with ISIS. Israel confirms that. Therefore, what's preventing Israel from collaborating with people who would potentially kidnap innocent Israelis? I mean, and they're confirming that now. And the reason this is so important is it debunks the Israeli narrative that all of the Western mainstream media adopted following October the 7th. The fact that some of these families who were kidnapped on the 7th of October in Israel were not actually kidnapped by the Palestinian resistance, but by other armed groups. And that proves yet again how complicit Israel is in what happened. There was an operation that was prepared against them. There were certain limitations and orders for the Palestinian resistance. However, Israel turning a blind eye, despite multiple warnings that came not only for the security and intelligence services Israel, but for the Prime Minister's office himself, 4 hours before the operation began on the 7th of October, proves that they knew very well what was about to happen. They allowed it to happen in hope that they would gain everything that they want in terms of the interests, the strategic and financial interests of the state of Israel, whether it's to do with the gas of the shores of Gaza or another expansion of the state of Israel, only for them to realize after 2 years that they failed miserably and that they couldn't defeat Gaza. They couldn't defeat Gaza despite all of the destruction. Its people did not give up. They did not want to leave Gaza, and they still remain there. And despite all of their destruction, all of the barbarism of the Israeli terror forces in Gaza, they insist on remaining there, rebuilding Gaza and continuing to a brighter future ahead.